The twin suns of Zephyr 7 burned high in the sky, their harsh rays reflecting off the crystalline structures of the Zephyran capital. Amara stood at the edge of the Grand Tribunal, a place of judgment and exile. The crowd gathered in the amphitheater buzzed with anticipation, their sleek biomechanical forms glittering in the sunlight. They had come to witness the spectacle of her condemnation. She was a sight to behold, even in her disheveled state. Her bioluminescent quills shimmered faintly, cascading like a glowing waterfall down her back, and her translucent skin reflected the colors of the surrounding crystals. But her beauty meant nothing to the Zephyran elite. They only saw her paralyzed forelimbs, limp and useless against her otherwise regal form. "You are unworthy," proclaimed Eldrax, the tribunal's presiding leader. His booming voice echoed across the amphitheater. "Your disability is a curse. A flaw. And in our society, there is no place for imperfection." The crowd erupted in agreement, their metallic voices blending into a mechanical symphony of judgment. Amara tried to raise her head high, but the weight of their disdain pressed her spirit down. "Eldrax," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "I am more than my limbs. I am Zephyran. You cannot cast me aside so easily." "You are no Zephyran," Eldrax spat, stepping closer. His 6 mechanical arms glinted with sharp edges, a testament to his physical enhancements. "You are nothing. And nothing has no place among us." With a wave of his hand, 2 guards approached, their augmented forms towering over her. They stripped her of the metallic bands around her wrists, her last connection to the technological symbiosis her people held sacred. The removal was both a physical and symbolic severing of her identity. "You will be taken to the wastelands of rejection," Eldrax declared. "Where you belong." Amara clenched her jaw, fighting the tears threatening to spill. The wastelands were a death sentence, a barren expanse of jagged rocks and toxic rains, where predators roamed and nothing grew. No Zephyran had ever returned from exile. The guards dragged her to the edge of the tribunal platform, where a shimmering portal hummed with unstable energy. Beyond it lay the wastelands. She stole one last look at the city she had once called home, its crystalline spires reaching toward the heavens. "I will survive," she whispered to herself. "Even if you don't believe I can." Without hesitation, the guards pushed her through the portal. The transition was instantaneous, and the change in atmosphere hit her like a physical blow. The air in the wastelands was thick and acrid, burning her lungs with every breath. The sky was a dull, sickly green, and acidic rain drizzled steadily, hissing as it struck the jagged rocks. She stumbled forward, her bare feet slipping on the slick terrain. Pain seared through her body as her paralyzed limbs hung uselessly at her sides. Each movement was an ordeal, and her body screamed for rest. But rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. The wastelands were not a place of respite. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the guttural growl of a predator. Its echoing cry was a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in this desolate place. Hours turned into days. Hunger gnawed at her, and her once glowing quills dimmed to a dull hue. She found water by licking droplets off smooth stones, though the liquid burned her tongue. Sleep came only in short, fitful bursts, interrupted by the sounds of shifting rocks and skittering creatures. On the 3rd day, she reached the edge of a deep canyon. Its walls sparkled faintly, a stark contrast to the wasteland's drab surroundings. The air here was different, humming with an energy she couldn't quite place. Exhausted and delirious, she stumbled closer to the edge. A faint light pulsed from the depths, its rhythm steady and hypnotic. Then she heard it, the whisper. "Amara." She froze, her heart pounding. The voice wasn't external, it resonated within her mind, soft yet commanding. It called her name again, pulling her toward the canyon's edge. She peered down and saw the source of the light, a massive orb, shifting and pulsing with living energy. It seemed to be made of molten glass, yet it moved like a living thing, radiating a warmth that called to her very soul. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the rocky ground. Tears streamed down her face as the voice grew stronger. "You are not abandoned," it said. "You are chosen." She didn't understand, but in that moment, she didn't need to. She reached out with her trembling, paralyzed forelimbs toward the light below. It surged upward, engulfing her in a cocoon of warmth and energy. Pain seared through her body, sharper than anything she'd felt before. Her limbs burned as if molten metal coursed through them, and her quills flared to life, glowing brighter than they ever had. As the pain subsided, she felt a strange new sensation in her paralyzed limbs. She opened her eyes and stared in awe. Her forelimbs, once lifeless, now shimmered with a translucent, crystalline sheen. They moved flexed, curled, responding to her thoughts as if they had always been part of her. The voice spoke again, this time with a tone of reverence. "You are the key to a new beginning." Amara rose to her feet, her newfound limbs gleaming in the dim light. For the first time, she didn't feel weak or broken. She felt powerful. The wastelands hadn't been her death sentence. They had been her crucible. And she had been reforged. Amara stood at the edge of the canyon, her new crystalline limbs pulsing faintly with life. The bioforged light still swirled around her, bathing the desolate landscape in a kaleidoscope of colors. Every nerve in her body tingled with newfound energy, a stark contrast to the weakness she had felt just hours before. She flexed her forelimbs experimentally. Once lifeless and paralyzed, they now shimmered with a translucent glow, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns of light. They felt more than an extension of her body. They felt connected to something vast and ancient, like a river flowing through time itself. As the glow of the bioforge receded, she heard the whisper again, this time clearer and more urgent. "The path is treacherous, but you are not alone. Move swiftly, for they will come for you." "Who are you?" she asked aloud, her voice trembling. The only response was the faint echo of her own words. The bioforge pulsed once more, sending a wave of energy through her limbs before falling silent. Amara looked around. The wastelands were still and eerie, but something had shifted. The predators that had stalked her before were nowhere in sight, as if the bioforge's awakening had driven them away, or perhaps they feared it. Either way, she wasn't safe. She could feel the urgency in the whisper's tone. Whatever had just happened to her was not something her people would ignore. The journey within Amara began her trek back toward the crystalline canyon's edge, her glowing limbs casting light on the jagged rocks. Every step felt like a rebirth. She had spent her entire life feeling incomplete, but now she moved with strength and purpose. Her once paralyzed forelimbs now gripped stones and pulled her up steep inclines with ease. The transformation had not just given her back her mobility, it had made her stronger than ever before. As she climbed, flashes of images flickered in her mind, unbidden and vivid. They were not her memories, but those of the bioforge itself. She saw glimpses of a golden age, where beings of light and energy, not unlike her own people, stood alongside the bioforge. They were creating, building, thriving. Then came the downfall. The images grew darker: war, destruction, and betrayal. The bioforge had been buried, hidden away, waiting for someone worthy to find it. Amara gasped as the final image burned into her mind, her own face, glowing with the power of the bioforge, standing against a tide of shadowy figures. "What does it want from me?" she murmured. The weight of the bioforge's history pressed on her, but there was no time for doubt. The pursuit her fears were confirmed when, hours later, the sky above her darkened. A low hum filled the air, followed by the unmistakable gleam of Zifferan patrol ships. They had come for her. A voice boomed from above. "Amara, surrender yourself. You carry a power that does not belong to you." The ship descended, its sleek, crystalline form bristling with weaponry. 3 figures emerged, their biomechanical bodies gleaming in the toxic rain. They were enforcers, elite warriors loyal to Eldrax. Amara's pulse quickened. She had no weapons, no training, and no reinforcements. But she had her new limbs in the bioforge. The enforcers wasted no time. One lunged at her, a spear-like appendage extending from their arm. Amara's instincts took over. Her crystalline forelimbs moved on their own, intercepting the attack and locking the spear in place. A pulse of energy surged through her limbs, shattering the weapon into fragments. The enforcer stumbled back in shock. Amara didn't hesitate. She swept her arm in a wide arc, sending a wave of energy toward her attackers. The ground beneath them cracked and heaved, throwing them off balance. Another enforcer charged, but this time, Amara's crystalline limbs morphed, extending into a shield that absorbed the blow before reshaping into a blade. With a single strike, she disarmed her foe. The patrol ship above fired a beam of light, targeting her directly. Amara raised her arms instinctively, and the bioforge responded. A glowing barrier erupted around her, deflecting the attack. She could feel the energy coursing through her, each action unlocking more of the bioforge's potential. But it wasn't limitless. Each move drained her, and she could feel exhaustion creeping in. She needed to escape. A new ally. As the final enforcer prepared to strike, a sudden blast from the canyon's edge sent them sprawling. Amara turned to see a figure stepping out from the shadows. He was tall, his body a patchwork of scavenged biomechanical parts that didn't match, yet somehow worked together. His face was obscured by a mask, but his voice was strong and steady. "Amara, I presume," he said, raising a makeshift weapon. "I've been looking for you." "Who are you?" she asked, wary but grateful for the help. "A friend," he replied, blasting the patrol ship with a burst of energy. The ship sputtered and retreated into the clouds. "Let's just say I've been waiting for someone like you." Amara hesitated. "How do you know me?" "I know what you carry," he said, gesturing to her glowing limbs. "The bioforge. You're not the first to awaken it, but you're the first to survive. Come with me. If you stay here, they'll send more." She looked at the fallen enforcers, their bodies already stirring as they began to recover. She had no choice. Nodding, she followed the stranger toward a hidden passageway carved into the canyon wall. As they disappeared into the shadows, Amara felt the bioforge stir within her once more. "This is only the beginning," the whisper said. And deep down, she knew it was right. The hidden passage led Amara and her mysterious ally into a vast underground network of tunnels carved into the crystalline bedrock of the canyon. Faint, bioluminescent veins glowed along the walls, casting an eerie but beautiful light. The air was thick with the scent of damp minerals, and the faint hum of distant energy reverberated through the caverns. Amara followed the stranger, her crystalline limbs pulsing faintly in the darkness. Questions churned in her mind, but exhaustion kept her silent until they reached a large chamber filled with makeshift equipment and flickering consoles. The cavern bustled with activity. Other outcasts worked tirelessly, their mismatched biomechanical enhancements a testament to their resourcefulness and resilience. The stranger finally removed his mask, revealing a sharp, angular face lined with scars. His piercing, metallic eyes betrayed years of hardship, but there was a fire in them, a determination Amara recognized immediately. "My name is Kale," he said, gesturing to the gathered outcasts. "We are the unworthy, like you, cast aside by Zifferin society. For years, we've been surviving in the shadows, waiting for someone to change things. And then, the bioforge chose you." Amara hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice trembling. "I was abandoned, left to die. I don't know how to lead a revolution." Kale stepped closer, his expression softening. "The bioforge doesn't choose randomly. It saw something in you, a strength, a potential that we need. You've already defied the odds by surviving the wastelands. That makes you stronger than you realize." The gathered outcasts began to approach, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and awe as they took in Amara's glowing limbs. For the first time in years, she saw something other than pity or disdain in the faces of others. She saw belief. A flicker of hope over the next few days, Kale and the others shared their stories. Each outcast had been exiled for a different reason: a missing limb, a failed augmentation, or simply not meeting the Zifferin standard of perfection. Yet together, they had forged a community built on mutual support and innovation. They scavenged old tech, repurposed discarded enhancements, and even developed new weapons to defend themselves. Amara trained with Kale, learning to harness her bioforge-powered limbs. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, alive and reactive, capable of reshaping into shields, blades, or tools at her will. But the power came with a cost. Each use drained her energy, leaving her physically and emotionally exhausted. "You need to pace yourself," Kale warned during one sparring session. "The bioforge is powerful, but it isn't infinite. If you overextend, it could kill you." Amara nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. Despite the challenges, she felt herself growing stronger. Each day, she pushed her limits, determined to prove to herself and to the others that she could be the leader they needed. As she trained, she couldn't ignore the whispers of the bioforge. They were faint but persistent, urging her to act, to rise, to challenge the very foundation of Zifferin society. The call to action one evening, as the outcasts gathered around a holographic map of the Zifferin capital, Kale outlined their plan. The city's crystalline spires housed not only the elites but also the central nexus, a massive energy core that powered their biomechanical enhancements. If the outcasts could take control of the nexus, they could disable the augmentations of the elites, leveling the playing field. "This is our chance," Kale said, his voice firm. "With the bioforged power, we can disrupt their system and show them that perfection isn't the only path to strength." The room erupted in murmurs. Some were eager to act, while others hesitated, fearing the consequences of an all-out rebellion. Amara stood, her glowing limbs casting an ethereal light over the group. "I know you're afraid," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I am too. But fear is what they use to control us. They want us to believe we're broken, that we don't matter. But we do. And if we stand together, we can show them that our imperfections are our strength." The murmurs faded, replaced by nods of agreement. One by one, the outcasts pledged their support, their faces filled with determination. Amara felt a surge of pride and responsibility. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. The infiltration. The night of the mission arrived. Under the cover of darkness, Amara and the outcasts made their way toward the Zifferin capital. Their journey through the wastelands was treacherous, but Amara's bioforge-enhanced limbs proved invaluable, carving paths through obstacles and shielding the group from dangers. When they reached the capital's outskirts, Kale activated a device that emitted a pulse, disrupting the city's surveillance systems. The group slipped through the outer defenses, moving with practiced precision. The city's interior was a stark contrast to the wastelands. Its crystalline streets shimmered with artificial light, and the air was crisp and sterile. Amara felt a pang of bitterness as she remembered the life she had once been a part of, a life that had cast her aside. Their goal was the central nexus, a towering structure at the heart of the city. The closer they got, the more resistance they encountered. Zifferin enforcers, alerted to the intrusion, descended upon them in waves. Amara fought alongside the outcasts, her bioforge limbs morphing into weapons that deflected attacks and struck with devastating force. Despite their progress, the group began to falter under the relentless assault. Amara's limbs grew heavier with each use, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But then, she remembered the faces of the outcasts, the hope they had placed in her. She couldn't fail them. The turning point. As they reached the nexus, a final line of enforcers stood in their way, led by Eldrax himself. His towering form, bristling with advanced augmentations, radiated menace. "You think you can challenge us?" he sneered. "You are nothing but broken remnants of a failed system." Amara stepped forward, her limbs glowing brighter than ever. "We are more than you'll ever understand," she said, her voice steady. "And today, We take back what you tried to steal from us, our worth. The battle that followed was a whirlwind of energy and fury. Amara pushed her bioforge to its limits, matching Eldrak's blow for blow. Her limbs morphed into shields and blades, countering his every attack. The other outcasts fought valiantly, their makeshift weapons holding the line against the enforcers. Finally, with a surge of energy, Amara struck a decisive blow, her crystalline blade shattering Eldrax's core augmentation. He collapsed, stunned, and defeated. The outcasts surged forward, disabling the Nexus's defenses and taking control of the core. As the energy from the Nexus flickered and dimmed, the lights of the city began to falter. The Zifferans, stripped of their enhancements, were left vulnerable and exposed. Amara stood at the heart of the Nexus, her limbs glowing faintly. The battle was over, but the revolution was just beginning. The central Nexus pulsed with diminishing energy, casting the Zifferan capital into an unfamiliar darkness. The once gleaming city, a beacon of biomechanical perfection, now stood silent and vulnerable. Its inhabitants, stripped of their augmentations, wandered the streets in confusion and fear. For the first time, they were without the technological enhancements they believed defined them. Amara stood at the heart of the Nexus, her crystalline limbs glowing faintly but steadily. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but her gaze was fixed on Eldrax, who knelt before her, his once formidable frame reduced to frailty without his enhancements. Around her, the outcasts cheered, their voices a triumphant roar that echoed through the cavernous structure. "You think you've won?" Eldrax spat, his voice weak but defiant. "Without our augmentations, our civilization will fall into chaos. You've doomed us all." Amara stepped closer, her glowing limbs illuminating his haggard face. "Your civilization was already doomed," she said, her voice steady but laced with grief. "You built it on exclusion, on cruelty. This isn't destruction, it's a rebirth." Eldrax sneered, but his words faltered as the outcasts surrounded him. They weren't vengeful, their expressions were resolute, even compassionate. For them, this wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming their dignity and building a new future. Uniting the divided as dawn broke, the outcasts took control of the city's main communication systems. Amara's face appeared on every hollow screen, her voice broadcast to every corner of Ziffer 7. "To my people," she began, her tone firm but compassionate. "For too long, we have lived under the illusion that perfection is strength. That flaws make us weak. But I stand before you now as proof that our imperfections are what make us resilient, creative, and strong." She paused, her glowing limbs raised to emphasize her words. "I was abandoned because I was different, just as many of you have been judged and cast aside. But today, we begin a new era, one where no one is left behind. One where strength is found in our unity, not our perfection." The message spread like wildfire. Across the city and into the wastelands, Zifferans watched and listened. Some felt anger, their beliefs challenged by her words. Others felt relief, a spark of hope igniting within them for the first time. And among the outcasts, there was a growing sense of pride. They had once been hidden and forgotten, but now they stood as equals. The challenge of rebuilding the days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Amara and the outcasts worked tirelessly to stabilize the city, repairing the damage caused by the battle and reconfiguring the Nexus to provide power without reinforcing the old hierarchy. Kale took charge of logistics, organizing efforts to distribute resources and aid to the city's most vulnerable. But not everyone welcomed the change. Groups of former elites, still clinging to their creed of perfection, formed resistance factions. They sabotaged infrastructure, spread propaganda, and sought to undermine Amara's leadership. One evening, as Amara stood on a balcony overlooking the city, Kale joined her. The horizon glowed faintly with the city's recovering energy grid, but smoke from scattered fires lingered in the air. "They won't let go of the past easily," Kale said, leaning against the railing. "For some, the idea of imperfection is more terrifying than death." Amara nodded, her crystalline limbs dim with exhaustion. I know. Change is always hard. But this isn't about erasing the past, it's about building something better. Kale smiled faintly. You're a better leader than you give yourself credit for. I'm just trying to survive, she said softly. Like the rest of us. The final confrontation. As tensions grew, word reached Amara that a faction of elites, led by Eldrax's closest allies, was gathering in the wastelands. They sought to reclaim the Nexus and reinstate the old order, believing they could restore their biomechanical enhancements and crush the outcasts. Amara knew she couldn't let that happen. Gathering her closest allies, she led a small force into the wastelands, determined to confront the resistance before they could strike. The final battle unfolded in the shadow of the crystalline canyon where Amara had first found the Bioforge. The elites, armed with scavenged technology and driven by desperation, fought fiercely. But the outcasts had something their opponents didn't: unity. Amara's crystalline limbs shone like a beacon, rallying her allies and cutting through the chaos. She moved with precision and purpose, her connection to the Bioforge guiding her actions. As the battle reached its climax, she faced the leader of the Resistance, a towering figure named Reiner, whose enhancements were crude but powerful. You think you can change our world with weakness? Reiner sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Perfection is the only way. Amara met his gaze, her voice calm but resolute. Perfection is a lie. And today, it ends. The duel was a whirlwind of energy and force. Reiner's raw strength clashed against Amara's finesse and adaptability. But as the fight wore on, it became clear that Amara's connection to the Bioforge was more than physical. It was a manifestation of her will, her resilience, and the collective strength of the outcasts. With a final, decisive strike, she shattered Reiner's weapon and disarmed him. The remaining elites, seeing their leader defeated, surrendered. The battle was over, and the future of Zephyr 7 was secured. A new beginning. Back in the city, the mood was one of cautious optimism. The resistance had been quelled, and the outcasts were no longer hidden. Amara stood before a gathering of Zephyrans, both elites and outcasts, at the base of the Nexus, her glowing limbs a symbol of the change they had all fought for. We are no longer defined by perfection, she declared, her voice carrying across the crowd. From this day forward, we will build a society where everyone has a place, where flaws are celebrated as part of what makes us whole. Together, we can create something greater than any of us could alone. The crowd erupted in applause, their voices rising in unison. For the first time, Zephyrans of all kinds stood side by side, united by a shared vision of a better future. Epilogue: The Shimmering Path. Months later, Amara stood at the edge of the canyon where her journey had begun. The Bioforge, now dormant, pulsed faintly beneath the surface, its power no longer hidden but shared with all of Zephyr 7. Kale joined her, his expression thoughtful. Do you think we've done enough? He asked. Amara smiled faintly, her crystalline limbs catching the light of the twin suns. Enough to start. The rest is up to them. As they gazed out over the horizon, the city in the distance shimmered with life and hope. Amara's journey had transformed her from an outcast into a leader, from abandoned to embraced. And while the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Zephyr 7 was no longer a place of perfection, it was a place of possibility.